Welcome to Spooky Interviews from Spooky Ventures. For this edition, we talk to author Dan Klefstad. Could you introduce yourself and your new book to our viewers?
Hello, Spooky Ventures. I'm Dan Klefstad, author of Fionas Guardians, a tale about humans who work for a beautiful, manipulative vampire named Fiona. It's out October 2nd, so people will be able to purchase it just in time for Halloween. It's published by Burton Mayers Books, a publisher out of the UK, and it's available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Walmart.com, etc. Just look for it. Fiona's Guardians by Dan Klefstad.
Your upcoming novel, Fiona's Guardians, is a vampire story. Can you tell us a bit about it?
My novel is a vampire story. Can you tell us a little bit about it? Well, I mentioned humans who work for a beautiful, manipulative vampire. Fiona is 250 years old when we meet her, and she is remarkable among her kind in that she is rather advanced, rather intelligent, and she would rather not leave a trail of dead bodies every night when she gets her mandatory 10 pints of O negative every evening. So she hires people to do her dirty work so the trail does not arrive at her doorstep if you're a homicide detective, for example. So she's very keen to avoid police. So she hires people starting in right around World War I, in the early 20th century. She hires people to first subdue the victims and then bring them to her. And then when blood donation becomes a thing, usually I think it's in the 1920s in Europe and then in the United States. When blood donation becomes a thing, she hires people who then hire other people in hospitals and blood banks and secure blood for her every night. Just find those stray bags that fall off the back of a truck, to use a mafia metaphor there.
Can you tell us what drew you to write a vampire story?
Okay, I've always been fascinated by monsters. Ever since I was a kid, a young teenager in the 1980s, playing Dungeons and Dragons. I was a real nerd. And I remember among the many books, extremely well illustrated and detailed books that D&D gamers had, was the Monster Manual. And I just poured through reading details about these monsters. And one of the monsters that I thought I was familiar with was the vampire. But there are actually all kinds of different vampires out there. The undead creatures who suck the blood of the living at night. You can find them in China, Malaysia, Europe, and like they're all different legends that you can find from Russia to Hungary to Romania to Germany and France. But the basic vampire that we know from film and most literature is usually portrayed as something that is stronger than we humans, that is sexier than we are, and can live forever unless something catastrophic happens, like a stake through the heart or exposure to sunlight. Beyond this, I find vampires also work on the level of metaphor, a creature that stands in for something that is draining our energy, whether it is a government entity, another human. It could be your mother, your neighbor, your pusher, your lover. It could be as something else, a corporate entity that you work for, that you become a slave to and you can't live without, but at the same time it's draining your energy. So I think vampires are also useful in getting us to ask ourselves, who's my vampire? What is the role I have in this dysfunctional relationship, or a relationship where I'm, existing and unwittingly perhaps serving another's needs? So that's why I find them so fascinating.
Can you talk a bit about the history of vampires in the minds of people and what you bring to it?
First of all, so many people have written about vampires or made TV or shows or films about them. And really only a handful of these portrayals of vampires are any good, actually. Yeah, we know the good ones, right? Bram Stoker's Dracula, Anne Rice's Interview with the Vampire. I'm talking about the novel in this case. And Stephen King's Salem's Lot comes to mind. Also, one of my favorites, the 2008 Swedish film and the novel that inspired it, Let the Right One In. The novel and the film are both very different experiences, but they're they're solid. They're really good stories. Lately, I've been thinking about, gosh, is there anything else to say about vampires? I mean, hasn't everything been done in this genre? Almost, I thought. Not much has been done. You could find a little bit here and there, but not much has been done about the humans who work for them and taking the story from the human's point of view. And so here's where I thought I'd give it a spin and try it. And I'll leave it up to others to say whether or not I've succeeded, but the early reviews on Goodreads and other places are encouraging.
Do you have a favorite medium, print or film, for horror?
Well, yeah. I think it's just as much as I enjoy literature, reading short stories or novels about monsters or ghosts or anything really. I read a wide range of genres, but if you're going to watch horror, I think it's absolutely critical that that you do it on film or TV, and I just feel that that's where horror really excels. Is when it's in your face, and you can see this in the earliest vampire films, for example, like Nosferatu by F.W. Murnau in 1922. That one came out. Murnau's film, he was just such a master of using light and shadow to create terror and dread and even sympathy, empathy with his characters. And so I thought that film was magnificent, and it just really showed right from the get-go that this is how horror should be presented.
We cannot live by spooky alone. What other things captivate your interest?
I love reading or consuming any media that has to do with fine wine, fine food, travel. I would love to, when when Americans are allowed to enter Europe again, and the UK and Ireland, I would like to go back. I've not yet been to France. I would love to see Paris and the French countryside. My favorite country in the world is probably Italy. I've been there only twice, and I so desperately want to get back there to Venice, Florence, Assisi, Rome, and I want to go even further north into Turin. And so I read as much as I can and watch as much TV or film as about Italy as I can, or about travel in general. So those are my other big interests. But I love red wine. I love a good glass of scotch and food of all kinds.
Have you created other works in other areas beyond horror spooky territory?
I mentioned earlier that I wrote a short story. This is the question: have you created works in other areas beyond horror, spooky territory? I mentioned that story Cowboy Load that I wrote, that it will be coming out in January. But I also wrote another short story that was published this past summer in Literary Heist, an online magazine, and that was a story about a literary agent searching for hope in the publishing profession. He's a jaded guy who is reading a manuscript about, interestingly enough, a vampire. It's a horror story, more gothic than bloody, and the agent is trying to figure out how to let this author down easy and say, you know what, you don't. It's impossible to market this kind of book right now, and I think you've written a great book, but I can't. The industry won't back me up, and we won't be able to sell enough copies because of the way the publishing industry is today. And that was my feeling at the time when a literary agent said some very kind words about the manuscript that became this book, Fionas Guardians. And he said, you're a magnificent writer, but it's just not going to sell with the big publishers, and that's how I would make my money. The agent says, they make their money on commission. So he let me down. He offered some very good advice about how to improve the manuscript, but he said I got to pass on this one. I still communicate with the agent, and showed him a review that I got in the Chicago Writers Association, which was very, very complimentary. And so he said, keep me updated. So I was thrilled to hear about that. So I wrote this short story based largely on this agent, in which he's searching for hope in the industry, and he's hoping that an author will come along with the right kind of book that he can sell, and so that he can continue to feel as if it's worthy. The publishing business still, should exist and support authors and everybody else who works in the business. So that's my story, Who Killed Publishing, which came out this past June in the summer 2020 issue of Literary Heist.
If you could sit down to dinner with any three people, living or dead, with whom would you be dining and what would be on the menu?
I actually had to think about this for a little while. I had to go away and sleep on it. And it took me a while, but I figured out the answer to this. The question is, name three people, living or dead, who you'd invite for dinner. What would you talk about? What would you ask them? And perhaps even more importantly, what would I serve them? I struggled a little bit with the three people, but I finally found out who I would like to invite. Two of them are no longer living. We'll start with Ernest Hemingway, one of the greatest American writers, Nobel Prize winner for literature, who writes in a style that I aspire to, very lean, very journalistic style. Hemingway proved that you don't need many words to tell a very powerful story. And he was challenged one day to write a 6-word story. And he succeeded. I think he did better than anybody could have. The 6-word story that Hemingway came up with on the fly pretty much was this: for sale, baby shoes, never worn. It's a powerful one. I would invite Mr. Hemingway to my dinner table and remind him of this short story that he told, very short, and invite him to write another 6-word story on the fly before dinner was over, just to see what he could come up with, just to see if he could do something as powerful a second time. The other person I'd invite, or another person I'd invite, is Mikhail Kalashnikov. Kalashnikov is the inventor of not the first assault rifle, but the one that is most widely used even today, I believe, last I heard. I am, of course, speaking of the AK-47. And I would ask him, Mikhail, once you said during a rather introspective moment that you wished you had invented something else. A really good lawnmower. And I would ask him, do you still feel that way? And why? The third person I'd invite is, last I checked, living, John Dominic Crossan, the author of the book Who Killed Jesus? Crossan is a New Testament scholar, and I remember him saying, probably 20, 25 years ago on NPR's Fresh Air, he observed that the Romans, the ancient Romans, certainly abused their power, particularly with those peoples they occupied. But they never wasted power. And Crossan did a little historical interpretation, basically, using the New Testament, and came to the conclusion there is no way the Romans, in particular the Roman leadership occupying Judea, ancient Judea, would have needed local religious leaders to convince him to kill Jesus. The Romans would have killed Jesus on their own. without any advice from anybody else, because of what Jesus was saying about another God. There's one God, and that the Romans, who worshipped a variety of gods, were in the wrong, were in error. And also, Crossan noted, and this is here where I would like him to elaborate on at the dinner table, that the chapters in the New Testament dealing with the death of Jesus, well, the arrest, the torture, and death of Jesus, are the root cause of anti-Semitism today. And I'd say, Mr. Crossan, please elaborate on that statement. What would I serve? Ooh, that's a good question. I have a few bottles of very fine wine, 1989 Chateau Latour. So I bring those bottles of Bordeaux to the table for my guests. Obviously, guests of this caliber deserve a wine of that caliber. And I'd probably serve something that goes especially well. You know, Bordeaux and roast lamb would go very well together. A little mint jelly, a little garlic, just enough, not to get in the way of the wine. And maybe afterwards, fine scotch or cognac as a nightcap. So that's my fantasy dinner with Ernest Hemingway, Mikhail Kalashnikov, and John Dominic Crossan.
Would you like to read an excerpt of the book for our viewers?
Most of this book is written from the point of view of the humans who do Fiona's dirty work for her. But a handful of times throughout the novel, Fiona addresses the reader directly. And this is one of those times. It's right at the beginning of the novel. Hello, mortal. I'm touched by your interest in those who work for me and those who used to. A handful truly deserve to be remembered in a book that never goes out of print. Their loyalty and talent are the reason I've existed for 2.5 centuries. A few, however, earned the painful and premature deaths detailed in these pages. For me, loyalty comes first and must be constant. That's not to say a partnership with me can't end in mutual agreement. It just never happened before. Still, I may allow my current guardian to retire. After serving longer than any other, he might well live his remaining years in a manner of his choosing. This would create an opportunity for another to earn his substantial salary and benefits. But a warning is in order. The work is as relentless and unsparing as my hunger, and everyone I employed has murdered at least once on my behalf. Not that this is the preferred option. There are other, less extreme ways to obtain blood for me, and Daniel built a robust network that could be handed off to a successor. He's in the car now, looking at his watch, wondering when we can go home to his decanter of scotch. From what I see, nothing in your cabinet would satisfy him, so rest assured I won't leave with any of your bottles. I see you've been reading job postings. Do not ask if I offer a retirement plan. In truth, I've never understood the concept. Each evening I awake knowing I'm the chief executive for extending my life, so ceasing work would amount to suicide. But this is what Daniel wants, and I owe him for that time he saved me from dying. It's in the book. My favorite chapters feature Agrippina, the one who created me. Driven by hunger, she brought me to the edge of death, but changed her mind when I started turning blue. She claimed she saw something worth preserving, a simple, unselfish nature that disappeared when she opened a vein for me. Since that moment, the only feeling I've known, besides adoration for her, is a craving that never ceases. That is, until the instant I tasted regret, the perpetual pain of guilt at not being with her when our enemies reappeared. They're in here too, and so is my revenge. Go ahead, indulge your curiosity. When you finish reading, I'll visit again and make myself visible. You'll find me sitting in that chair over there, and we can talk about your future. Until then.
What else would you like the viewers to know about that we haven't touched on in this interview?
The final question is, what else would you like viewers to know about that we haven't touched on in this interview? And I guess one of the things I'm thinking about now is I'm at a crossroads with this book, Fiona's Guardians. Do I want to write the sequel? And the end of the novel kind of indicates that there should be a sequel. The story might continue. Or do I wish to write the screenplay version of this and push it out into, to push it toward a studio that might, this is the Holy Grail, this is the Hail Mary pass, if you will, that might want to produce this for the big screen or the small screen. Either one. I would be just thrilled to have my novel turned into a film or a Netflix or Hulu series. HBO maybe. So yes, I'm trying to decide whether I should learn to write a screenplay and learn how to adapt a novel to the screen, or write the sequel. And how an author spends their time is important, because these projects can take a long time. So that's the thing I thought I'd add at the end of this interview. I had a great time, by the way. Thank you for asking these questions, and I look forward to seeing the interview on your site. Thank you.
Spooky Ventures is the home for spooky content and spooky merchandise on the web. Check it out today at spookyventures.com. And remember, always keep it spooky.